Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jared Genser. I'm going to be the moderator for our next panel, which is on the topic of neurotechnologies in national security applications. By way of a little background, I'm an international human rights lawyer based in Washington. I serve as outside general counsel to the Neurorights Foundation. I'm also a senior tech fellow at the Carr Center for Human Rights Policy at Harvard University, and I'm a lecturer in law at Stanford University Law School. We have a very distinguished and very interesting panel today to talk about national security applications of neurotechnologies. Before I introduce them, let me just introduce a little bit about the topic. As we know well, the application of neurotechnology is not limited to the healthcare setting or consumer market, and government and militaries around the world are investing significant resources into researching and developing neurotechnologies to understand both the risks of neurotechnology to national security. The question of mental augmentation is especially relevant in military settings, with brain-computer interfaces offering the potential to, among other things, monitor soldiers' physical and mental states in real time, enhance alertness and minimize the need for sleep, increase awareness and performance in combat setting, link brains to weapons and prosthetics, operate autonomous weapon systems, and access or intercept data. At the same time, nefarious actors may deploy neurotechnologies for purposes of repression, terrorism, and even neurowarfare. And we're really looking today at, how will forms of mental augmentation change the national security landscape and the ability of citizens and soldiers to protect themselves from human rights violations. We're also looking at what are the most pressing legal and human rights issues raised by their development and deployment in dual-use neurotechnologies. And we want to also talk on this panel about what role regulators, governments, militaries, and members of the industry have in ensuring that augmentative technologies are deployed in a safe and rights-respecting manner. Now for some quick introductions. I think we are still missing one panelist, but let me begin with the other two. Douglas Weber is the Akhtar and Bhutta Professor of the Neuroscience at the Neuroscience Institute and Biomedical Engineering College at Carnegie Mellon University. He's a founding member of DARPA's Biological Technologies Office, where he managed a portfolio of neurotechnology research programs to support the White House Brain Initiative. He created DARPA's Haptics, ElectRx, and TNT programs, which are developing implantable, injectable, and wearable neurotechnologies that restore natural motor and sensory functions for amputees, enable novel and drug-free therapies for treating inflammatory disease and mental health disorders, and to promote plasticity in the brain and to enhance the learning of complex cognitive skills. He received a BS in biomedical engineering from the Milwaukee School of Engineering, an MS in bioengineering at Arizona State University, and a PhD from Arizona State University, also in bioengineering. We'll have Douglas speak first to present some context from having worked in the field. We also hope and expect to hear from Bill Hannas as well. When he joins us, we'll have him present. But I also wanted to introduce another distinguished member of our panel, Claude Heller, who is the chairperson of the UN Committee Against Torture, which oversees the enforcement of the UN Convention Against Torture and other cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment or punishment. He previously was Mexico's permanent representative to the United Nations in New York from 2007 to 2011, during which time he served as president of the Security Council on 2 occasions. He's also served as Mexico's ambassador to France, Cuba, Austria, and Switzerland. And he was also ambassador to the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD, in Paris, and to the Organization of American States in Washington, D.C. He has a bachelor's degree in international relations from El Colegio de México and a master's degree in history and international relations from the Graduate Institute of International Studies in Geneva. So with that, let's get started on the panel. Again, I hope that Bill will join us shortly. It'd be great for each panelist to speak for no more than 10 minutes. And then there are lots of questions, I'm sure, that that we can discuss and that I have, and obviously others will have as well. So perhaps, Professor Weber, if I can hand it over to you to begin.
Sure thing. Thanks, Jared. Can you enable screen sharing? Oh, there it is. Super. So first of all, thanks to the organizers for putting this together. I think this has been a really interesting discussion. And these are becoming increasingly important topics for not only the innovation community to address, but society more largely. So I just wanted to start by talking a little bit about the technology and demonstrating some of the applications of the technology. I hope that'll provide a good context for the discussion that we'll have. So work in this space, and particularly in my lab, really focuses on devices that are designed to interact directly with neurons, really anywhere in the nervous system, to either sense or control signaling in various pathways. And it's really through an integration of kind of neuroscience and engineering that we're developing new technologies. So on the sensing side, we're mainly focused on measuring signals that indicate someone's status. I focus on motor systems. And so we are building brain-computer interfaces that allow people with spinal cord injury and other types of paralysis to regain control of devices in their environment. We focus a lot on implanted devices because implanted devices offer the best ability to measure signals in the brain. But with our focus on translation, we're also looking for wearable alternatives as well, because if we can eliminate the need for surgery, then presumably we can expand access to those technologies. But in addition to measuring signals in the nervous system, we're also very interested in using tools to not only measure signals, but control or regulate signaling in different parts of the nervous system to support a variety of applications. You know, a lot of my early work focused on restoring sensation to amputees, such that amputees could feel touch with their prosthetic hand, much like they could with their native hand. We use these technologies to reduce pain and treat chronic pain disorders. We're interested in cognitive functions as well. Can we improve alertness and enhance learning and plasticity using these approaches? And reanimation of paralyzed limbs is yet another application. I do want to emphasize that, you know, we and others in this space work very closely with companies, mostly small companies at this point, but there are a few larger companies that have relevant technology to support these applications, and I'll highlight a couple of examples. I don't think I need to, Jared did a great job on my background, so I'll just kind of jump right into things. So I did have the unique opportunity to spend 4 years as a program manager at DARPA. I joined in 2013, which was really at the start of the BRAIN initiative. And I think it's important to understand kind of DARPA's mission space when we're thinking about their interests in neurotechnology. So over the years, you know, DARPA is very well known for producing a number of kind of disruptive technologies, you know, starting with kind of the core technologies that laid the foundation for the internet, stealth technology, self-driving cars, intelligent digital assistants, you know, humanoid robotics. You know, and what we tend to see is that, you know, work that DARPA invests in early in roughly a 20, 30-year span turns into technology that is impacting society on fairly large scales. And so DARPA's investments in neurotech, you know, really started in the late 90s, early 2000s, and I think we're just starting to see early signs of the impact of that technology on our society. Their interests are, you know, initially, and I think in general, are motivated primarily by a desire to help warfighters recover from injuries sustained in service of our country. And so I'll highlight a couple of examples of programs that I created when I was there, focused on that. But in addition, you know, because this is such a powerful technology, I think there's also an interest in understanding just to what extent these same tools could be used to not only restore damaged function, but enhance native function. So when I was at DARPA, I started 3 programs. The first was called Haptics, and it was aimed at building connections with the nervous system that would link a prosthetic limb to the user, such that the movements of that limb and the sensations from that limb would be controlled and felt naturally to the user. And again, it's through connections made directly with the nervous system that exchange of information was made possible. The electrics program shortly followed that and was aimed at building technology that could regulate specifically inflammatory processes in the body to try to counteract the effects of inflammatory disease. You can think of this as maybe a more natural alternative to pharmacological and biological therapies for those diseases. And then the targeted neuroplasticity training program, again, leveraged many of the same technologies, but was really focused on modifying function in the brain to accelerate the pace and extend the level to which plasticity occurs, particularly during cognitive skill development. So we can come back and talk more about some of DARPA's interests, but I want to spend the next couple of minutes just really kind of showcasing some of the work we and others in this field have been doing, because so much of it has really started to have clinical impact. And so there's a real world aspect of it of this work that I think is super important. So for those of you that may not be familiar with brain-computer interface technologies, the goal is really to build a bridge between spared parts of the nervous system, specifically the brain, that remain intact after an injury, such as a spinal cord injury, and access from those areas of the brain some information about an action that the person is trying to perform, whether it's navigating a wheelchair, controlling a computer, speaking, or otherwise. Information about those actions are represented in parts of the brain which we can access with neurotechnology. And now I'll just play a video demonstrating work from over nearly 15 years ago now. This is Jen Collinger from University of Pittsburgh, and the participant she's working with is paralyzed from the neck down.
And straight down, and left and right and diagonally. I can close it and open it, and I can go forward and back.
That is just the most astounding thing I've ever seen. Can we shake hands?
Sure.
No, really.
Yeah.
Like, come right over here?
Yes, you come over there.
Okay.
Grasp your hand there. There we go.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
And I can do a fist bump if you'd like.
So I think this is a nice example of really the promise of neurotechnology for re-enabling someone with severe paralysis, the ability to interact with people and objects in the environment. I'm running short on time, but I just want to emphasize that while that technology is super powerful, it does require a fairly invasive surgery to gain that level of access to the brain. So we're working with companies like Synchron to develop less invasive approaches to placing sensors in the brain. And so the Stentrode is a device that is delivered to the brain through a blood vessel. So it's minimal surgery, but it still allows intimate coupling between the brain's signaling and external devices. And I won't have time to play this video, but it shows someone with a person with ALS filling out a pain questionnaire. He's fully locked in and otherwise unable to communicate his thoughts and feelings, but now with the help of a BCI, he's able to share his feelings. We're also working on wearable devices. This is a project with Meta. They have a technology that measures electrical signals from muscles. Even muscles that are paralyzed in the arm can still produce myoelectric signals that indicate someone's attempt to move. We can use those signals to move cursors on the screen, play video games, type email messages, and so on. And so it's yet another example of how we can use technology to sort of bypass damaged parts of the nervous system. We're also using technology that allows us to amplify functions that are become impaired by diseases such as stroke. And this is a project that we're doing with the University of Pittsburgh, and we have a spin-off company called Reach Neuro, where we're electrically stimulating structures in the spinal cord that boost activation of muscles that are impaired by stroke. And so now I'll just quickly, I'll skip through parts of this video. So this is a woman that was 9.5 years out from her stroke. Her left arm was severely impaired. She had difficulty, holding objects in her hand because of the weakness. She has to rely heavily on her good hand to really accomplish most activities of daily living. You'll see here that, even after finally getting a hold of the food, because of the impairment in other areas of her arm, she's unable to rotate her wrist and flex her elbow enough to bring the food to her mouth. So now I'm just going to skip. Now, a few minutes later, we're going to turn on stimulation that's being applied to nerves in her neck. Now her hand works much better. With one try, she gets firm hold of the food. And because her arm function is also improved, she's able to really finish the job. So this is an example of how the same type of neural interface technology can take weak functions in the nervous system and make them stronger to recover natural function. So don't need to really summarize, but maybe for some discussion points, I think we want to continue the discussion about medical versus non-medical applications. And I really think about these in terms of what are the benefits relative to the costs and risks. How do we ensure that these, what we think are groundbreaking technologies, how are they available to everyone that would want to use them? How do we ensure that people's identity is preserved and that we don't compromise agency? And then at the end of the day, I think, when we're worrying about some of the concerns, I think we have to compare the effects of neurotechnology with many of the other things that are already available in society. And I think a lot about, how drugs and devices are often designed to do many similar things. And I think in many cases, drugs are easier to implement and so on. So sorry if I went a little bit long, but again, I just wanted to provide some context.
Well, thank you so much, Professor. Really exceptionally interesting presentation. You're doing obviously really important work, and I think the context was very, very valuable for this important discussion. I'm now going to introduce and turn over next to Bill Hannas. Bill's the lead analyst at the Center for Security and Emerging Technology at Georgetown University. Prior to joining that group, he was a member of the Senior Intelligence Service of the Central Intelligence Agency, where he served as an executive expert for advanced technical projects and was a three-time recipient of the McCone Award for Technological Innovation. He was an assistant professor of Chinese at Georgetown, where he taught Chinese and Korean, and concurrently served as the CIA's open source enterprise, with that group, monitoring Asian language publications. He began his career on submarines and crypto analyst of foreign ciphers. He holds a BA in Chinese and Russian history from Temple University, an MA from the University of Chicago in Chinese, and a PhD from the University of Pennsylvania in East Asian languages and logistics. So now let me turn it over to you, Bill, to make your opening 10 minutes of remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Jared. It's a pleasure to join. So let me tell you a little bit about my organization so you have background for what follows. The Center for Security and Emerging Technology was set up about 6 years ago within Georgetown University with a generous grant from a Silicon Valley philanthropist to detect, monitor, and help mitigate existential threats to humanity. In practical terms, we scope that way down. Humanity is defined by the country that exists between in the northern hemisphere between the Pacific and Atlantic Ocean. And we serve the policymakers, what I'm saying, U.S. policymakers primarily. And in terms of what we can do with our limited staff of 60, about half of which are doing research, we look at artificial intelligence, biological threats, cyber, and advanced computing. That's pretty much it. And the usual countries of concern, China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, when we could do it. My own team looks exclusively at China AI, which when I say team, I mean 3 people, basically. We're all Chinese linguists. So we came into neuroscience kind of through the back door. Our primary focus for the past couple of years has been on China's progress from artificial to artificial general and eventually artificial super intelligence. The theoretical literature suggests that there are a number of pathways, about half a dozen, to this alleged state of AGI, this hypothetical state of AGI, including cognitive enhancement through BCI. And we determined that China is pursuing each of them to greater or lesser degrees, hence our interest in today's topic. Also, and this is not widely known, but China until about 2015 saw AI as a sub-discipline of neuroscience. All state AI funding used the neuroscience funding codes until about 2016, and that connection stayed embedded, in their collective outlook toward AI, even after it was recognized and funded as a standalone discipline. So this is the background for the study we undertook about a year and a half ago. The data is about 2 years old on China's non-therapeutic uses of BCI. And we deliberately excluded medical uses of BCI, other than note that it constitutes the bulk of that country's research and applications. And we also ignored military research and applications, which they're covered elsewhere, frankly. Margaret Counsel at Georgia Tech 3 years ago, and Rand a little bit before that. They have good papers on the topic, and we have provided input to classified DoD studies, on it. So we wanted to look specifically at non-therapeutic cognitive augmentation and how that would lead potentially to AGI. So it's a dual-use technology. No one argues that, and we do argue, however, that national security is not defined wholly or even primarily in terms of battlefield prowess, but rather as a nation's overall ability to compete with adversaries. So to the extent that BCIs usher in cognitive advances and ultimately artificial general intelligence, those countries first to achieve these milestones, have a national security advantage over the rest. So in a nutshell, we took literally 777 Chinese documents. The bulk were peer-reviewed studies, maybe 150 or so, I can't remember, patents that China had filed that were specifically non-therapeutic uses of BCI, and we analyzed them up and down, left and right. Who was involved in it? Where were they from? What were their specific interests? And we found that there were 129 Chinese companies or institutes working on this particular topic. This includes companies that are dedicated to that and name this as their goal, and also companies who have scientists who claim these companies that are writing on the topic and claim these companies as their affiliations, companies and organizations. Another takeaway was their non-invasive BCI is world-class. It's not our opinion alone. We have subject matter experts, on contract who weighed in here and determined that is indeed the case. Their invasive procedures were late starting, but they're catching up. They're invested very heavily in artificial intelligence to understand BCI, which in turn is going to be used to help them further their own AI and AGI agenda. So it completes the cycle. The major applications we saw that they were working on, the one that stood out was cognitive state detection and determining emotional states. You can read into that what you want. Stimulation, effective computing, that was big. Improving the invasive electrode arrays and the materials used to minimize rejection. And of course, brain-machine communication itself. We weren't looking for papers on ethics, but we did note them when we found them. And of the 663 papers we looked at, only 10 specifically addressed ethics as a problem. That's not encouraging. So, beyond its implications for national security, the greater dangers we see are the technology's potential to fundamentally alter humanity, especially under the auspices of a totalitarian regime bent on preserving its one-party dominance over a compliant population. And we didn't get this from the papers. This is me adding my analysis to what we found. But perhaps we do have statements that are similar to that coming right out of the horse's mouth. Like one Tsinghua University professor, Gao Xiaorong, he opined that BCI will be the venue for interacting with artificial superintelligence. Now, if I were to say that, I'd be laughed out of the room, but this guy is really high up the pecking order in China, and I think he means what he says. Another quote from another major figure in the Chinese Academy of Science, former vice minister of their science ministry. This is worth quoting in detail. The basic intent is to start from the brain, use human information processing methods to build a virtual brain, and use brain-computer interaction to realize the fusion and integration of biological brain, virtual brain, and human-computer intelligence. they had this thing, and it's persistent. You see it in all of their state declarations, beginning in 2017, when they issued their proclamation on how they're going to do AI, about the need to merge human and machine intelligence. They're big on it. I don't know how many hundreds of times I've seen that phrase. It's meant in a number of different ways, but one of the ways they do mean it is literally to eliminate the distinction between the two types of intelligences. Again, you can't make this kind of thing up. It's there in the literature. So, none of these developments in BCR are happening in a vacuum either. The neuroscience research leading to what China hopes will lead to artificial general intelligence, I mean, it's being conducted in China at more than 30 institutes. And these are credible people, with international publications. So we're also noticing that China is ahead of the West in a certain sense in laying out what they call prototype AGI as part of their smart cities operation, beginning with the famous city of Wuhan, where they're trying to optimize production through AI and also with social simulators, optimizing human interaction, which is pretty scary. Now, you put their other work on BCI on top of that thing, their efforts to create what they call hybrid cognition, and you've got something that has all the earmarks of a proverbial AI dystopia, which I think is pretty much what we're talking about here today. That's all I have.
Thank you very much for your perspective and views. Really, really interesting and complementary to what we've already heard. I now want to turn over the floor to Claude Heller, who comes at these issues from a very different perspective as a diplomat and now chair of the UN Committee Against Torture. And having already introduced him previously, let me turn it over to you for your opening remarks as well.
Thank you very much for the invitation. I want to recall that in November 2023, you and Dr. Hannas provided a briefing to the United Nations Committee Against Torture in Geneva on the potential implications of terrorism and protection and
I'm sorry, Claude. Just let me I'm not sure if you can get closer to the microphone, but there's an echo kind of in the background, which is making it hard to hear you.
Okay, I will try again. It's fine.
No, it feels like you're kind of coming at us from a distance. It's like it's echoing a little bit.
I will put some headphones.
Okay, yeah, that would be great. Thank you. Sorry about that.
Is it better?
Oh, yes. Perfect. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Well, I was recalling that in November 2023, you yourself and Dr. Yuste provide a briefing to the United Nations Committee Against Torture on the potential implications of current and emerging neurotechnologies for the implementation of the convention. The purpose of the meeting was to enlighten the members about the positive scientific progress made in neurotechnology, but also to call their attention on the potential risks that could arise from its misuse or abuse. The members of the committee were very interested. It was the first time that they were exposed to this presentation, and especially interested by the interpretation, your proposal on the interpretation of the Council of Human Rights that should be extended to include 5 denominated neurorights: the right to mental privacy, the rights to one's mental identity, the rights to one's own activity and freedom of choice, the right to equal access to neuroaugmentation, and the right to be protected from potential biases in the information and algorithms used in the neurotechnology. Recently, the United Nations Security Council members have shown increased interest in discussing the implications of new and emerging technologies on international peace and security. In recent years, they have convened several formal and informal meetings to address various aspects, such as technology and peacekeeping, technology and security, artificial intelligence, and anticipating scientific developments. These meetings have sought to deepen the Council's understanding of emerging technologies and raise awareness of their implications for international peace and security. And they have also provided a platform for Council members to reflect on the need for global cooperation in addressing evolving threats. Last October, Switzerland, at the time chairing the Security Council, organized a briefing on anticipating the impact of scientific developments on international peace and security, including specific fields that should be in the radar of the Council, such as neurotechnology, quantum technologies, and synthetic biology, with the participation of the Geneva Science and Diplomacy Anticipator, a platform designed to anticipate future scientific breakthroughs. The focus was on neurotechnology. Neuromethods have the potential to drastically affect parties involved in the battlefields, for example, fighters that may need less sleep, be less sensitive to pain, or benefit from enhanced decision-making. They may also affect the work of humanitarian organizations by generating new tools to address paralysis or post-traumatic stress disorder. In September of last year, the General Assembly adopted the so-called Pact for the Future that includes the need to seize opportunities associated with the new and emerging technologies and address the potential risk posed by their misuses. It's important to emphasize that in different meetings, security members have underscored the importance of addressing the human rights implications of artificial intelligence. Broader human rights risks have been associated with mass surveillance and its misuse in national context, particularly for counter-terrorism and law enforcement purposes. Neurotechnologies provide a growing number of opportunities which must be are to be explored, but without obscuring the profound ethical and human rights implications at stake. Considering this background, in October 22, the Human Rights Council adopted a resolution requesting the advisory committee, that is independent expert members, to prepare a study on the impact, opportunities, and challenges of neurotechnology with regard to the promotion and protection of human rights. The designated rapporteurs presented last October a study that includes action-oriented recommendation and how the impact of neurotechnology can be addressed within the Human Rights Council, the special procedures, and its subsidiary bodies in a coherent, holistic, and inclusive manner. The study distinguished two basic types of neurotechnology. First, neuroimaging employed for the diagnosis of mental states that includes devices and techniques used to observe the structure or functioning of the brain. Second, alterated and modulated the functioning of the brain, writing into it was neuromodulation techniques and devices normally do through the inhibition or stimulation of parts of the brain. But the main issue is what is the human rights impact. Briefly, I would say that this study that is going to be presented this month to the Human Rights Council speak about the impact of the freedom of thought that affects the several treaties and of human rights bodies, some proposed application of neurotechnology in the areas of justice and national security may lead to criminalization of mere thought. With the support of the neurotechnology, people can be punished for unexpressed thoughts or intention and preventive decisions. Violations can happen in the context of the counter-terrorist policies. If neurotechnology are used to preemptively punish nonviolent action, for that reason, the trend to introduce national security exceptions in artificial intelligence instruments and regulation raises concerns as they may not offer sufficient protection against problematic use of neurotechnologies. Those can be used to interfere and manipulate individuals through neuromodulation devices that led to the brainwash. The Committee Against Torture has examples of coercive policy of some states justified by a doctrine of necessity defense in the penal law as a possible justification for the crime of torture in the context of physical interrogation methods by national security agencies. In the same direction, the so-called ticking time bomb is an exception which allows for the use of physical pressure during interrogation by security officials of terrorists suspect holding information about potential terrorist acts. The right to privacy affects also, of course, the treaty body system, the right to personal integrity, the right to enjoyment of the highest attainable standard of physical and mental health, the prohibition of torture, cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment is particularly relevant, knowing that the absolute character of the prohibitions underlines the gravity of the interference and the relevance to states to consider this obligation on the context of neurotechnology. Is the Convention Against Torture, but also the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. The right to a fair trial and essential procedural guarantees where the presumption of innocence and the right to not to testify against oneself requires that no direct or indirect physical or undue psychological pressure be exerted by the authorities. This study also looks for what are the main categories of group in vulnerable situation during the trial phase: persons with disability, children, and older persons, and considering the different settings. On the military domain, research agencies are actively pursuing brain stimulation technologies to modulate cognitive function such as memory and learning. Advances in brain-computer interfaces could reportedly augment soldiers' combat abilities in different ways. The identification of applicable standards to limit use contrary to international law, including human rights and international humanitarian law, seems to be critical. The idea of introducing augmented soldiers is worrying, and red lines should be drawn. Developments in this field should be closely scrutinized with a view to adopting specific international governance frameworks. Beyond the international policies or national legislation, the conclusion of this advisory group is that the recommendation of the elaboration of a soft law document containing a set of guiding principles to mainstream a human rights approach could help states to comply with these commitments while favoring cohesion among national responses. It would support a national and international human rights body in designing and overseeing public policies, offering valuable guidance to public authorities. In this sense, the Human Rights Council, that is in the debate shape right now, has to look forward the future if the preparation of a non-binding document is advisable. We cannot expect a lot of progress also for critical reasons of the Security Council. These are the main elements that I would like to stress. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Claude, for the kind of brilliant, broad brush overview of the engagement of the international human rights system in all of these really important questions. I think it's really a great complement to the presentations from Douglas and Bill, who have been kind of working practically in the field, and very much appreciate the interdisciplinary approach that we have on this panel. Let me start by directing a question first to Douglas and Bill, and then I'll come back, Claude, to you on a different question. But for Douglas and Bill, one of the questions that a lot of people have been asking has been, as neurotechnologies become more sophisticated, how do you anticipate they might be used by adversaries to compromise national security? Often in the world of human rights, we talk about use cases, right? When you think about concerns about human rights, you need to think about potential violations and what do those look like. And are there specific vulnerabilities that you think we need to be aware of when it comes to the potential future mental augmentation in the national security space?
Bill, do you want to start?
Sure.
You've
So-
studied more carefully than I have.
I have to be careful not to stray into science fiction on this because a lot has been written on that very
Well, and I was going to
subject.
say that's actually the most important thing that we need to do on this panel as well, which is that I'll come to neuroweapons next, but theoretical neuroweapons. But I think we have to be very, very careful to distinguish about exactly what is science and what is not, because there's a popular understanding of what might be possible that to me far exceeds what is currently possible.
As I mentioned, we deliberately did not look at weaponry because other people were doing it, and there's only so many things we can do. And our specific approach has been, cognitive augmentation aimed at achieving artificial general intelligence, which is where they're headed. But along the way, a lot of nasty things can happen. So we noticed that there was a specific concern with identifying cognitive states and emotion in particular in the Chinese state-funded research, as most of it is. And that's a two-way street. On the one hand, you see the obvious link there with the regimes wish to perpetuate itself eternally, and keeping the peasants at bay. There's the one link, but it can be turned around just as easily and used weaponized against other states too. I can't say we've seen it. We haven't looked for it. I don't know if we would find it open source if we did look for it, but there is that potential. I guess what I'm trying to say is this is everybody, the state, not state, the U.S. Commerce Department in particular, they recognize this and have for a long time as a so-called dual-use technology. So pretty much anything you can imagine, is possible. But let's, as you said, let's stay out of science fiction for the time being.
Douglas, do you have any further thoughts?
Yeah, my my answer is that it's a really important but very difficult question to answer, generally speaking, right? I think if you identify specific examples or concerns like brainwashing, for example, I think Claude mentioned that. Is there the potential to use neurotechnology to change someone's way of thinking? Perhaps. Are there unique abilities to do that with neurotechnology that you can't do with social media and other things? Probably not. And so I think we have to recognize both the potential capabilities as well as the profound limitations of neurotechnology. It's not a tool that scales well, especially if we're talking about devices that have to be implanted in the body. That is not a simple procedure to do at scale, whereas a social media campaign certainly is. And so, I don't mean to say that we shouldn't be thinking about potential threats. I think we just need to do so in the right context.
I can add something to that. We did notice, as I said, a lot of attention being paid to so-called effective computing. Now, it's a stretch to imagine that PCIs are going to dictate how people think, but how people think is not necessarily determined, by the abstract cognition that we imagine ourselves capable of, objective cognition. It's largely how you feel, whether you want to think about something or not. And then when you do think about it, do you want to continue thinking about it, and how? Much of that is determined by, at least by my understanding, the independent track, in the brain that controls emotions. And it's a two-way street in China. Not only is there this effort to try to understand people's emotional states, but also to stimulate them. And here's where there's good reason to do it. I mean, you've got people who are desperately in need of therapeutic intervention, worldwide. Our subject matter expert was adamant on that subject. It's not something you want to discourage. But on the other hand, if you can do it for beneficial purposes, someone can also do it for nefarious purposes as well.
And let me, before turning back to Claude on some of the legal and ethical issues, ask, because there are a number of people asking these questions as well. People have talked a lot about Hannas syndrome, and last summer, and I want to be very precise in what I say based on news reports that I've read. But last summer, there was a report that said that new intelligence has led two U.S. intelligence agencies to include it's possible, a small number of the Hannas syndrome elements that have impacted spies, soldiers, and diplomats around the world may have been caused by a novel weapon. But both judgments at the time were made with low confidence, according to the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. And possessing a capability is not the same as proof as it having been used. But people have heard the reports, obviously, about Hannas syndrome, and whether or not such a weapon exists. It seems, as of now, based on the best public reporting, that it has not yet been deployed. But is this a technology you believe is going to ultimately be developed, or is capable of being developed? And what are the implications of that? First for Douglas and Bill, and then I'll come back to Claude in the next question.
Knowing what I know about existing neural interface technologies, and again, my applications are focused primarily in the medical space. I'm not aware of a clear path to creating a weapon that could be used in a case like the Havana situation. Does that, is it possible that there is some unknown, some technology that's not widely known to the neural interface technology community, which I've been a part of for 30 plus years? Maybe, but seems pretty unlikely.
Bill, do you have any thoughts on that? And obviously, there are lots of questions about China, which has been pumping in $1 billion a year into research in the neurotechnology space, and all run, as far as I understand it, through the Chinese military. So, but of course, it's very opaque, extraordinarily opaque, exactly what they're doing with all that money in that research. You probably know better than anybody what they're up to from the outside. But any thoughts on neuro weapons?
I can't say that I saw any information wearing actually either of my hats that would suggest there's anything to this idea that weapons have already been used effectively. I simply don't know. I mean, how many people killed Kennedy, right? It's the same kind of thing, depending on who you ask. So
Sure.
I'd rather not weigh in there. Weaponization, I mean, sure, it's going to happen. I mean, everything. A rock is a weapon. My pencil is a weapon. I mean, everything's a weapon, in the hands of people. It's all a question of intent. Before we started looking at China AI in particular and its nexus with neuroscience, we did do a little bit of work looking at some of the military uses of neuroscience, pharmacology in particular, and we didn't come up with a whole lot in terms of weaponization. Most of what we saw were interventions to try to keep soldiers awake 24 hours normally than they would be, that kind of thing. But that's old tech. I can't help you too much here.
No worries. I appreciate that. And again, I think it was something that we need to address precisely so that we can, again, distinguish fact from fiction. Claude, let me turn back to you as we look to round out this panel, because, obviously I think that there are enormous human rights and legal and regulatory concerns. And who do you think, from your view, should be responsible, for regulating the use of mental augmentation in national security contexts? Is it multilateral organizations? Is it national governments? Is it ethics organizations? How do you see, from your decades of experience working in the field of international human rights, as a way forward here? And is it, any different for neurotechnologies than it is for any other kind of emerging tech, or are there distinguishing features of neurotechnologies that you think would make it stand out?
Is this question for me?
Yes. Yeah.
I would I would say that of course the different treaty bodies have their own history, and the new dimensions were not incorporated in the international agreement. What we are seeing right now at the international level is we have different international initiatives with different approach in the UNESCO, in the OECD, in the Organization of American States, in the Council of Europe. At the level of national legislation, I think that there is some progress, but they are very disconnected. We know that, and it's mentioned in the study, the examples of Brazil, of Chile, of China, France, Spain, and of course, of the United States. But let me come back to, it's my impression of what you asked before, of the weaponizing of the technique in order to use in a war. What Israel did on Hezbollah members, interfering the ears, phone, I don't know how to you call in English, that there was a way of use of the technology to harm, to even to kill or to attack Hezbollah in the war that Israel had in this part. So cyber attacks, cyber policies are also have to be considered in this discussion. Thank you.
All right, thanks so much. Well, we're coming to the end of our time here. Are there any last comments, Douglas or Bill, you'd like to make as we wrap up this panel?
Just my usual caution, admonition. People need to watch China closely, particularly technology. For a long time, China was famous for stealing things from other people. They still do it, but they're quite the technological. They're quite advanced technological in their own, and I don't think we've actually bridged that gap yet. Between by me, I mean the West, not the non-China world, of disregarding them because we were so far ahead, didn't matter. Those days are gone, and we need to pay close attention to what China is doing. not just in AI, not just in neuroscience and BI, but across the whole spectrum of technologies. And I can't say that we're really doing that. We pay lip service to it, but and we have meetings like we're doing now. But I'd be happier to sleep better if more people were more worried about China.
Got it. Thanks for that,
If
Douglas.
I may, add, I think it's important that the international community and the states address more closely the impact of human rights. That's an issue, how to deal with it. We are in a very incipient basis on considering what would be the neurorights, what could be the obligations that states have to assume. I think it's a very important. It's very important our committee against torture, for other committees also. But I think it's a step that has to be taken by the international community.
Douglas, any last comments?
No, I think we've covered a lot of ground. I just want to emphasize that it's important to separate the scientific fact from fiction, like we've discussed a couple of times. And the facts are pretty clear. Like the journals do a very good job of putting out publicly accessible releases anytime there's a breakthrough in the field. And so I would just encourage the entire community to read the literature carefully and educate yourselves on what the technology is really capable of and see what some of the limitations are, because I think that will help everyone form their own judgment about what the opportunities and threats are.
Well, thank you to the three of you. On that note, we will conclude the panel. I think we've covered a lot of ground, and undoubtedly we could probably spend many hours and many days and months talking about these important issues. I think they are going to become much higher profile in the years to come, especially as emerging consumer neurotechnologies expand exponentially in the coming years. And it's an exciting time to be working in this field. And there's some amazing things that are coming and are being developed. And we've heard a lot about this all day, and that's, I think, very exciting. And at the same time, exactly as Claude said as well, we need to be focused on and concerned about potential misuse and abuse of neurotechnologies, and ensure that at a national and international level that we're addressing these issues, that we're working in a complementary way with companies, and that the public at large is understanding these issues as much as possible in real time and grounded in the science and the medicine, most importantly, in order to be very clear on what is and is not possible and what may be possible in the future. So let me leave it at that and turn it back to Stephen. Thanks, everyone.